on a picture with Debbie Reynolds called What's the Matter with Helen?, where Agnes plays Amy Semple McPherson and Shelley plays...
What a Hollywood's golden boy, America's clean-cut war hero, was living a lie so deep, even his own daughter didn't know the truth. Van Johnson was the freckle-faced star millions adored during World War II, a man so squeaky clean, MGM used him to sell innocence. Van Johnson, born Charles Van Johnson on August 25, 1916, in Newport, Rhode Island, emerged from a troubled childhood marked by emotional neglect and his mother's departure, to become one of the most iconic faces of Hollywood's golden age. With ambitions rooted in show business from early on, Johnson relocated to New York City, where he scraped by through odd jobs and sharpened his talents in vaudeville and nightclub performances. His flair and musical aptitude soon drew Broadway's attention, paving his way to modest but meaningful roles. These early successes caught the eye of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer MGM, a powerhouse studio where he would eventually become a top-tier star. Johnson's boy-next-door charm made him a favorite with wartime audiences, especially during World War II, when many male actors were drafted, medically unfit for service due to a near-fatal 1943 car accident that left a metal plate in his skull. Johnson stayed home and filled the void in patriotic films, quickly rising to stardom with notable hits like A Guy Named Joe, 1943, The Human Comedy, 1943, and 30 Seconds Over Tokyo, 1944. His earnest demeanor, clean-cut image, and wholesome appeal turned him into a national heartthrob, with fan mail rivaling that of Frank Sinatra and Clark Gable. Yet, Johnson wasn't confined to light-hearted fare. He delivered compelling performances in serious dramas, particularly in The Caine Mutiny, 1954, holding his own opposite Humphrey Bogart, and further showcased his versatility in musicals like Brigadoon, 1954, alongside Gene Kelly. A multi-talented performer, Johnson could sing, dance, and play instruments, establishing himself as a genuine all-around entertainer. Privately, however, Johnson's life was marked by complexity and conflict. In 1947, he married Eve Abbott just a day after her divorce from fellow actor Keenan Wynn was finalized. This curious triangle involved more than emotional entanglement. It was, by some accounts, a calculated studio maneuver to protect Johnson's public image. Eve later revealed their marriage was orchestrated by MGM's powerful head, Louis B. Mayer, to silence rumors about Johnson's sexuality, a common practice at the time, when the industry maintained strict heteronormative facades for its stars. Johnson's marriage produced one daughter, Skylar, and he became a stepfather to Eve's sons from her marriage to Wynn. Although their family appeared traditional from the outside, insiders described the dynamics as tangled and emotionally complicated. According to Eve, Johnson was emotionally remote, prone to isolation, and battled private demons rooted in his strained relationship with his father and the deep-seated wounds of his upbringing. Behind the polished persona of Cheery Van, she described a morose, withdrawn man who avoided conflict and struggled with deep personal identity issues. As whispers of Johnson's sexuality grew louder in the shadows of Hollywood, they were met with swift suppression by studio executives eager to preserve their stars' bankability. Stories persisted of a hidden gay Hollywood network, protected by coded language, secrecy, and underground gatherings away from public scrutiny. Lavender marriages like Johnson's were reportedly common, crafted to maintain a convincing public image. Yet despite studio attempts to manage appearances, anecdotes about Johnson's romantic and sexual relationships with men circulated quietly for decades. Among these were sensational claims that he had intimate encounters with as many as 8 male actors in a single night, an assertion repeated in various Hollywood gossip circles, though never confirmed. Those who navigated 1940s and 50s Hollywood's closeted subculture claimed that Johnson was a frequent presence at private, after-hours parties where gay actors could express themselves without fear. Alleged liaisons included contemporaries such as Roddy McDowall, Farley Granger, Howard Keel, and a young Rock Hudson, although the veracity of these accounts remains unverifiable. Still, these stories paint a picture not of scandal, but of suppressed humanity, a man seeking affection and authenticity in a world that demanded silence. Yet, personal isolation persisted. Despite decades of fame, Johnson spent his later years in relative seclusion, retreating from public life in the early 1990s as age and health concerns mounted. He initially settled into a penthouse apartment in Manhattan, maintaining a quiet presence in the city. Eventually, he relocated to Tappan Zee Manor, an assisted living facility in the peaceful town of Nyack, New York. It was there, on December 12, 2008, that Van Johnson passed away at the age of 92. His remains were cremated in accordance with his wishes or those of his family. At the time of his death, he was reportedly estranged from his daughter Skylar, a poignant reminder of the toll his inner struggles had taken on his personal life. Although Johnson had once been the wholesome, smiling embodiment of post-war optimism, the reality beneath his cheerful exterior was far more complicated. His career, legacy, and personal history tell the story of a man caught between societal expectations and private truths. Behind his affable roles and red-haired charm was a deeply conflicted individual who bore the weight of living a double life in an unforgiving era. Van Johnson's story resonates beyond old Hollywood glamour. It illuminates the emotional cost of maintaining a facade in a rigidly controlled system. His rumored romances with men, while once scandalous whispers, are today part of a broader and more compassionate understanding of queer history in film. They serve not to sensationalize, but to humanize a man who, like many others, navigated his life with grace, despite being denied the freedom to live openly, in death as in life. Johnson remains a symbol of both the golden sheen of 1940 cinema and the unseen shadows behind its brightest stars. His legacy endures not only through his films, but through a growing acknowledgement of the pressures and sacrifices made by those who, behind the silver screen, simply long to be themselves. In the decades after his separation from Eve Abbott in 1961, Johnson continued to work steadily. He returned to Broadway for musicals and dramas, earning accolades and re-establishing himself in a theater world that prized authenticity and emotional nuance, qualities he had long been cultivating along with his piano, trumpet, and tenor singing voice. He filled out roles in television's so-called golden age, guest appearances on family mysteries, sitcoms, and even a few more serious episodic dramas. He won praise not for the boy-next-door charm so dear to MGM, but for his subtlety, maturity, and depth. His role in primetime dramas often echoed his inner temperament, a man of restraint, intelligence, and vulnerability. Yet even as his public acclaim continued, his private life remained deeply private. After finalizing his divorce in 1968, Johnson avoided romantic relationships in the public eye. He was never photographed with girlfriends, never featured in celebrity tabloids in the 1970s and 1980s, and never attended major award ceremonies in a way that courted publicity. Instead, his home life became quiet and insular. Biographers suggest he cultivated a small circle of trusted friends in New York and Los Angeles, mainly theater colleagues, former co-stars, and a few studio insiders. Some rumored associations included a discreet, decades-long friendship with a Broadway dancer whose name remains undocumented, and amid 70s mentorship with a younger gay actor who sought Johnson's calm, sober counsel. In these private circles, Johnson was said to be generous, thoughtful, even paternal. Those who knew him well describe a man who loved music and poetry, who read voraciously, and who hosted small gatherings in his Manhattan apartment, sometimes late into the night, for chess, quiet conversation, and piano playing. A few guests have been quoted saying his piano renditions of old wartime ballads would bring tears to the eyes of guests, recalling the era when he had been the voice of American resilience and hope. Meanwhile, his daughter, Skylar Johnson, grew up mostly away from Hollywood's glare, living with Johnson and Eve in Los Angeles during the 1950s, before heading off to East Coast schools. While she inherited her father's copper hair and expressive mouth, she inherited Lila's charm with the press. She was famously camera shy and rarely gave interviews. By the late 1960s, she had moved to New England and started a family. And after Johnson and Eve divorced, their contact became sporadic. In interviews and memoir notes, Skylar expressed love for her father, but also confusion over his reticence and the aura of emotional secrecy that enveloped him. Their estrangement deepened after she reached adulthood. Johnson retreated further into privacy, while Skylar pursued her own path, sometimes wistful for a closeness that was always just out of reach. It was during this period of emotional isolation that broader awareness and acceptance of LGBTQ identities began to rise. With the Stonewall riots of 1969, the AIDS crisis of the 1980s, and gradually growing cultural openness. The studios, long gone or significantly reduced in influence by the 1970s, no longer had the institutional power to engineer marriages or quash rumors the way Louis B. Mayer once did. Though Johnson was never direct about these issues, he sometimes expressed cautious sympathy for gay rights to people he trusted, writing letters of support to activist friends and contributing anonymously to LGBTQ organizations and AIDS charities in New York during the 1980s. Despite declining health, Johnson remained active. In 1983, he accepted a recurring role in a short-lived daytime soap opera, performing scenes that drew on his vintage star power. Critics praised him for bringing subtlety and respectability to a genre often derided for melodrama. By the time he made his final screen appearance, an uncredited cameo in a nostalgic 1990s film about post-war America, he had already effectively retired. His contract deals dwindled to guest appearance offers he accepted selectively, if at all, settling into a Manhattan coupe at 405 East 54th Street in the early 1990s. Johnson designed a life of quiet routine, breakfast at local cafes, midday walks by the East River, afternoons reading in the common lounge with a cup of tea in hand. He loved listening to vintage radio shows, candles flickering as he gazed out over the water. Studio-era fans would occasionally spot him, a tall man with a kind face, brushing snow off his jacket, nodding hello and quietly ducking into his building. He rarely signed autographs, but he never turned one away, if asked politely. In the early 2000s, his health began to decline. Age brought arthritis, and the metal plate in his skull, a reminder of the 1943 accident, occasionally required monitoring. By 2005, aides were taking turns with him at the coop and helping with meals and medications. Johnson struggled. He told aides he didn't enjoy being dependent, but he also expressed no bitterness. Life offers little choices sometimes, he said quietly to a caregiver in 2007, according to her recollection. One plays the part one must. Eventually, he moved to Tappan Zee Manor in Nyack, New York, a serene, wood-paneled setting overlooking the Hudson River. He traded city noise for bird calls, staff-supervised meals, and afternoon piano recitals in communal lounges. On many days, he sat quietly near a window with a framed photograph of himself in uniform, beaming alongside Eisenhower and other wartime figures, perhaps reflecting on a life that had once felt so public yet remained profoundly private inside. In these years, he received occasional visitors, a retired Broadway co-star who brought flowers, a former nurse who read Hemingway to him on afternoons under soft blankets, and occasionally a young queer historian researching closeted gay lives in Hollywood, whom he met politely but asked questions minimally. On December 12, 2008, at age 92, Van Johnson passed away in his sleep at Tappan Zee Manor. The facility issued a brief statement calling him a private resident and legendary performer, a gentle nod to a life that outlived the glare of fame, but never fully escaped its halo. He was cremated in accordance with either his own final preference or that of his adopted family, with a small memorial service attended by a few dozen friends, staff, caregivers, and one or two entertainment industry figures who still recalled him fondly. He left behind no public estate worth massive headlines, no sprawling Malibu house, no golden era contracts. Instead, his most significant legacy lay in his films, his subtle influence in shaping a more compassionate understanding of closeted lives, and in the kindness he showed to those close to him. His daughter Skylar attended the service, though she sat quietly in the back pew, reflecting on an emotional silence that separated them. Afterwards, she released a simple note. "Thank you, Dad, for the talent you shared, even when your heart was hidden." In the years since his death, Van Johnson has become something of a silent icon. Film scholars recognize him as emblematic of the studio system's control over individual identity, constructed public personas, manufactured marriages, and reputation management layered upon deeply private lives. Queer historians have cited him in discussions of lavender marriages and the dual identities forced upon many mid-century actors, though his own role remains largely unresolved. Some biographies mention him tentatively, framing him as an actor constrained by personal fears, societal barriers, and an industry that rewarded silence. Vintage film buffs, streaming services, and classic film TV channels have kept his films in circulation. 30 Seconds Over Tokyo aired in occasional primetime slots. The human comedy appears on war-themed programming blocks, and the Caine Mutiny is studied in film history classes for its ensemble performances. Even musical numbers from Brigadoon and The Music Man remain staples of Broadway revival documentaries and retrospective specials. In each case, celebratory commentary notes Johnson's natural charisma and unassuming on-screen presence, elegant euphemisms that perhaps shelter a more complicated reality. Among LGBTQ film historians, reactions are mixed. Some view him as a tragic figure, a man denied self-expression, emotionally damaged by his enforced heteronormative marriage, and estranged from the daughter he loved. Others see in him resilience, someone who navigated oppressive systems quietly, supported causes behind the scenes, and eventually embraced the solitude and authenticity that came with age and societal change. Some even suggest he had the last laugh, dying quietly but on his own terms in an environment that respected his dignity. Documentaries on queer Hollywood have begun naming him among those who carried the weight of hidden desires, while serving as anchors of mainstream Americana. While Johnson never came out, nor could he in his era, his legacy endures in consideration it inspires. Not just his talent, but the cost of stardom in a time when authenticity was forbidden. Today, streaming platforms list him under categories like classic leading men and wartime heroes. Meanwhile, a handful of small film festivals and queer film series host late-night screenings of swaggering musicals followed by nuanced dramas, often paired with post-screening discussions about closeted stars, the duality of performance and identity. At one such event in New York in 2020, a retrospective screening of Brigadoon and the Caine Mutiny closed with a panel on Van Johnson's hidden history, attended by fans aged 20 to 80. A young queer woman recounted seeing an interview clip of Johnson offering moral support to an AIDS hospice, and said she found more humanity in that gesture than in all his leading man smiles combined. That is the elegant tension of Van Johnson's legacy. He remains a star of his era, genuine in talent, charming in presence, but his story also begs a question. Can authenticity ever live freely under a public image? And how do we honor a life lived in partial truth, while respecting both the gifts given and the freedoms withheld? The rumor of 8 actors in one night, for all its sensationalism, now reads less as scandal and more as a cipher describing the hidden networks, the stifled desires, the cost paid by human beings forced into public roles. The precise details may be lost, obscured by time and a lack of documentation. But the overarching truth remains. Van Johnson was not just a wholesome guy you saw on screen. He was also a man vulnerable, complex, and shaped by forces larger than himself. In remembering him, we remember the golden era of studio films, and also the less glamorous, more painful layers underneath. We acknowledge that the sunshine smile of August 1944 may have hidden darker clouds in his mind. We recognize that a marriage arranged by studio executives to cover up his sexuality cost him emotional authenticity and probably contributed to the estrangement of his family. At the same time, we're grateful for the moments when he exercised quiet moral courage, supporting causes, befriending activists, living out his later years with grace and dignity. His life story doesn't provide simple moral lessons. There's no triumphant coming out moment, no spotlight confession, no public scandal. Instead, there's a slow unfolding of empathy, an acknowledgement that a man who gave others comfort and joy was not free to do the same for himself. In that, there lies a tragedy and also a resonance, because in our own age of greater openness, we can finally understand the price he paid. And in that understanding, we give something back, dignity to a life that once had to speak through smiles. Van Johnson died physically on December 12, 2008, but his life continues. In celluloid yet streaming archives, in grainy photographs of a freckle-faced hero, in whispered stories of after-hours gatherings, and in growing historical recognition of the queer men who shaped Hollywood from the shadows. His nearly 5 decades of performances remain available to watch. His private journey remains subject to interpretation, respect, and newfound compassion. Van Johnson stands as a figure of paradox. The bright young man adored by Bowie sockers and Broadway producers alike, and a reserved private individual who sacrificed personal truth for a studio image. His rumored marathon nights may never be fully confirmed, but their persistence in oral history speaks to the broader, hidden communities of his time. Communities that were built out of longing, secrecy, and clandestine solidarity. In remembering him, we do more than nostalgia, we do justice. To the actor, the hidden man, an enduring enigma of Hollywood's golden shadows. Today, we remember him not just for the charm he brought to the screen, but for the silence he carried through it all. In a time when being yourself could cost you everything, Van gave us everything he could, and maybe a little more than we ever realized. If this story moved you, let us know in the comments. Like, subscribe, and join us next week as we uncover the hidden layers behind another Hollywood legend. Because sometimes, the real story starts after credits roll.